Lucy is heading out to the mountains on a 10-day mountain adventure. She's going to be on horseback, eating on the trail, sleeping out. I actually have no idea of all the details, but she came to us and said that she wanted to stay carnivore. And we didn't actually know if we could pull this off, but thankfully the camp has a freeze dryer and they agreed to work with us to create some freeze dried meals, because when I Googled carnivore backpacking meals slash freeze dried meals, I couldn't really find anything, and the few carnivore type freeze dried things that I could find were just not within our budget. So in this video, I just filmed putting together some meals that we are going to freeze and package and put into a freeze dryer. It's going to be a two-part series because while Lucy's on the trail, she's going to try to take some videos of how the meals perform, and then we're sending her away with enough food that when she gets back, we can test some of the leftover meals. So I'm going to just get right into it, making the meals and getting them ready for the freeze dryer, and we hope that you enjoy the video. Okay, so the way that we filmed this video, I'm going to share, first of all, cooking all of the meats that we're going to use in our freeze-dried meals, shredding the cheese that we're going to add to it, freezing the individual ingredients, as in the meat and the cheese, mixing those ingredients together for the individual freeze-dried meals, and then finally at the end, I'm going to share the canned and packaged carnivore snacks that we found that Lucy can eat on the trail or on her horse for those days that the camp isn't going to stop to make a campfire where she can reconstitute one of the freeze-dried meals. So for the first meat, we're going to cook these pork ribs. And if you're curious about what that dressing is, it's just apple cider vinegar with some salt, pepper, and honey. I know that that's not carnivore, but we are trying to come up with some sauces that we can tolerate, because I'm sure I'm not the only one to think this, but it just gets so boring eating meat all the time. So we're trying to find some creative ways to cook the meat so we don't feel like we're just eating the same thing with each meal. So that's what we did on these pork ribs, and then we cooked them between the two baking sheets with the aluminum foil. I think Jeff cooked them at 275 for about 4 hours, and they are so delicious like this. Now, I'm not a fan of using aluminum foil, but until I can find a better way to do this, this is just how we're going to cook these. They're just really nice and tender and fall off the bone. So if we were going to eat this for a meal, we would just portion those out, and we might add some cheese or some pork rinds or some boiled eggs. We might add a little bit of each of those items to our plate for a fully carnivore meal there. But we're going to take all that in a little bit. We're going to shred it and freeze it so that we can add it to these freeze-dried meals. Okay, the next meat that we cooked are these fatty chicken thighs, and we're just putting those on those baking sheets again with the aluminum foil, some salt and pepper, and then we baked those at 300 for about 3 hours, basically just until they reached the proper internal temperature, and then they were really nice and tender and fall off the bone. If we were going to eat this for our carnivore meal, we would just load up our plates with the chicken thighs. Like, we'll sit down and try to eat. I think for mine, I eat 5. I eat 4 to 5 typically. Jeff will eat 5. Our oldest kids will eat 4 to 5, and then the younger kids will eat 3, and our toddlers will eat 2. We don't really enjoy doing that because it's sort of a lot of chicken, but I try to eat everything off the bone that I possibly can chew, all the skin and the fat and all of that. I just view it as I'm fueling my body. So that's how we would normally eat this meal. But for these freeze-dried meals, what we're going to do is we're going to pull all the chicken off the bone. We're going to chop it nice and fine, and then we're going to spread it onto these cookie sheets so that we can freeze it. Now, we don't have a freeze dryer, but the camp does. So what we're doing is we were just following their directions, and they said that the pieces of food needed to be 1/2 of an inch tall or thick, or I hope I'm explaining that correctly, so that she can lay it out onto a cookie sheet and it's only about 1/2 of an inch thick of food, and then she can freeze dry it. So we were trying to follow those guidelines when cooking and freezing our individual meat. So that's the chicken. It's frozen, and we just crumble it off of those cookie sheets, and we're gonna put all of that into these plastic or into the Ziploc bags, return that to the freezer, and then we're gonna move on to the next meat. The next meat that we're gonna freeze is ground beef. So we just put that ground beef, it's just a ground beef log that we buy at Costco. We just put it into a cast iron Dutch oven with some salt and pepper and baked that in the oven until it was done. And then we're just gonna crumble it up and layer it onto these cookie sheets. And again, just like the pork and the chicken, freeze that, then take it out of the freezer, crumble it all up, put it into a Ziploc bag, and again, return that to the freezer as another individual ingredient for these meals. And here are the pork ribs. Just like the chicken, we just pulled it all off the bone and then shredded the meat, laid it out onto our baking sheets so that each of those pieces could individually freeze, and then broke it all up and put it into our Ziploc bag and then return that to the freezer. So I think you get the idea by now of what we're doing here. We're just cooking up all of our individual components. For our cheeses, we're going to be shredding those, and then we're freezing them so that they'll all freeze in tiny little bits and not just like a huge clump, basically, and putting it back into the freezer. And then we're going to pull all of those individually frozen ingredients or components of each of the meals out and mix them together into the meals to be freeze dried. Another meal that we did were these sausages. We just cut those up so that they were 1/2 inch, so they would be small enough to freeze dry. And again, baked them, cut them up, froze them individually, then put them into a Ziploc bag, making sure that they weren't freezing into a clump. Now for our cheeses, we are going to use the squeaker cheese, and I'm just showing you right here. Basically, this is Jeff's layout or his menu plan, and he actually ended up figuring out what Lucy needed based on her body weight and age, how much she needed of protein and fat. Now, the reason that he did this is because she's going to be on the trail. And if she's still hungry, it's not like she's at home where she can just go and make something else or just go into the fridge and get something to eat. We wanted to make sure that with each meal, she was actually getting exactly what her body needed for the extra physical activity that she's going to be doing out there. But on top of that, I didn't want to have her have a ton of food left over from each meal because we live in a pretty densely populated, we have a lot of grizzly bears, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So I've just been kind of worried, thinking, I'm going to send her with all of this grizzly bear food, basically, and if she can't finish it, I don't think they throw it on the side of the trail. They probably burn it in their campfire or something. But even so, we really wanted to get it where she could actually finish the entire meal and make sure that she was getting all of the protein and fat that she needed to perform her best. So that's why Jeff went ahead and figured all of that out, and I was just showing that on the screen briefly and explaining why he was weighing out the cheese. So we did squeaker cheeses, and I showed that was the white cheese, and we ground that up in the blender, and then Jeff shredded some cheddar cheese, and we froze that, and we're going to add that to the meals too. So moving on from cooking everything and crumbling it and freezing it, these are all the individual components. We've got ground beef, scrambled eggs, sausages, like cut up sausages. We have shredded pork ribs and shredded chicken thighs, along with some squeaker cheeses that were blended up and frozen, and then some cheddar cheese. And now we're going to assemble the meals, and Jeff is weighing out each component again to make sure that Lucy is getting enough fat and protein while she's on the trail. So here's a meal example. It's the shredded cheese with some sausages and ground beef, and we just mix all that together. Each item is already frozen, so it's not going to freeze together in a clump. Mix it all together, and then we're putting them into small Ziploc bags, labeling those and returning those to the freezer so that we can take those to the camp and have them freeze dry it. That's how we assembled all of the meals. We did most of the meals in these smaller Ziploc bags. These are for daily meals, but then we also did some heavier meals so that on the days that she's feeling extra hungry, she can just go to the camp cook and say, could I have one of my larger meals today? And if she's not as hungry, she can just say, can I have one of the smaller meals today? And then of course she has a bunch of carnivore snacks and canned foods that I'm going to share in just a little bit here. Millie really enjoyed this because we were chopping everything up so finely. So to keep her busy, she got to sample pretty much everything in her high chair. And so far, she's just been a carnivore baby. She's eaten a few strawberries from the garden and some avocado, but for the most part, this is just some of her favorite stuff right here. So she was enjoying getting to taste all the ingredients for these meals. So Jeff is mixing the meals. I'm putting them into the Ziploc bags, labeling them, and then putting them into the freezer until we're ready to package them up and take them to the freeze dryer. When we had started eating carnivore, I gave up on the idea of getting a freeze dryer because I didn't know about canning fat and meat and things like that. But doing this project was really fun, and it actually showed me that a freeze dryer would be really useful. So I do think that's something that we're going to get in the future. This was just a really great experiment to find out how it works. So for the snack ideas, we've got some of those grass-fed beef sticks up there, and then this canned tuna. We tried to find some canned meats that were pretty basic and didn't have other ingredients in them that might bother Lucy. This is canned ham. We've also got some New Zealand corned beef that she can open up on the trail. And again, these are things that she can use if they're not going to start a fire or she just needs to add some calories to her meal. Some powdered milk, some powdered egg whites there. Also, we finally found pork rinds that are really basic. They're just pork rinds, lard, and salt. They don't have a bunch of other ingredients in them, so we got some of those for her to take. And then these moon cheese packages, I think Jeff found these on Costco online, and it's basically just freeze-dried cheese. So we chose 2 varieties with the least amount of extra ingredients in them so that these are things that Lucy could snack on if they're just on the trail riding their horses and they're not going to stop to light a fire and do a proper meal. So that's all of the extra sort of dried good type carnivore meals. And then all we did was just pack all of this up into our ice chest and take it to the camp. I didn't film that part because it was in a personal kitchen, so I didn't want to be invasive. But stay tuned for part 2 because we're going to share with you guys how all of this performed on the trail, and Lucy's going to try to take some video while she's out on the trail. So thanks for watching.